The Malaysian Digital Economy Corporation has been making waves in promoting its Malaysian video game industry worldwide, promoting Malaysian culture and talents far and wide. One such effort is opening a Malaysian pavilion at Tokyo Game Show 2023. At TGS 2023, 16 Malaysian companies showcased their products and services to potential Japanese clients during the event. Malaysia's participation is hoped to realize business and export opportunities, publishing and investment deals, as well as strategic partnerships. And earlier this year, MDEC and a handful of game developers also made their presence known in the Game Developer Conference, GDC, at San Francisco, California. One of those game developers won a prestigious IGF 2024 award. The government corporation has planned ahead for the future, with more digital content showcases and events, like MyDCF, including Level Up KL 2024, and Creative, slated for end of September and onward. This being a standalone video feature, perhaps a refresher on MDEC is in order. Here is the role of MDEC in the games industry scene in Malaysia, as stated by the man himself, MDEC CEO Technologist Mahadhir Aziz.
MDEC has been doing this around 20 years or so with regards to the games development industry. So it is very much a spin-off, if you may, from what MDEC started out, the creative content and multimedia back then was specifically looking at unearthing animation industry, and that was a gap within the creative industry in Malaysia, and MDEC has been in this particular space. The evolution or the graduation of MDEC's role is where we look at intellectual properties or IP from the animation, from the comics, 2D into 3D and all that, and then the movements towards commercializing those very intellectual properties into games. So it's quite natural for MDEC to be in the space. We know some of the companies. We have the strength as far as the skills within MDEC itself and the knowledge and the muscle memory from the animation. So that would be what would be the strong points why MDEC has been in the space, and we continue to take it further to now Web3, as you can see. So the convergence of creative content into what is digital creative content today, what we do with regards to the industry development of the creative content. So back to games development, we do actually enter the foray of building up the talents. So there are kinds of training for the community and the ecosystem out there, upskilling and trainings that are provided through MDEC programs and also its partners, that we continue to develop layers and supplies of new content developers, game designers, engineers, and then we actually cross that over with other aspect of animation that has made its way into the games development. Second part to that is we do provide funding. And this funding goes at multiple levels. There are, at the lowest level, something like a Digital Creative Content Challenge or DC3. And those are maybe for the, you can say, startups, upstarts, for some of these new ideas, new people who are about to enter into games development. So there's some assistance that we provide in the form of financial on top of the skills and connectivity. Lastly, when they are big enough, and this is where we do a bit more market access. So you would look to programs where it is tied to our digital export program, where we bring Malaysian companies that have reached certain levels of maturity. So for those companies to be brought together with us, where a federal agency from Malaysia would vouch for them, provide them with the kind of links to the studios out there, the kind of even bigger funding that they can have access to in different markets. Sometimes they are exploring by having an agency to support them, to open the doors for them and provide the links and bridges to those companies would be premium for the kind of companies that we help. So in a way, summarizing all that, I think we've been doing the industry development for digital creative content, and we continue to see the convergence and we look at other parts. Lastly, being an agency of the federal government, we also look at policy. There are enabling policies that we hope to be able to facilitate and even more participation and even more democratized and inclusive participation from all walks of life who have interest in the space of games development. So this would be among other areas that we look at.
I think MDEC is a big help for the industry as a whole. They have been making a lot of connections outside of Malaysia, like bringing in like talent from overseas. Gives us like a quicker access to talking to external publishers outside of Malaysia as well. And also they're bringing in like a lot of companies. We now see like Bandai being set up here, Sony being set up here, Larian Games set up here as well. And suddenly you're like, oh, we're kind of closer to these sort of international talents as well. So I think that's definitely a big help. I think one of the improvements from our opinion is that I think we are getting double taxed. If we sell a game on Steam, we get taxed on Steam and then we get taxed in Malaysia again. I think with some kind of relationship, maybe I know this is a very big pipe dream for a lot of people in Malaysia, but hopefully at some point we want to make the world a little smaller for us. If we sell, because once we release a game, it's like to the whole world, right? I think that's sort of closing the gap in terms of that. International relationship with other countries will definitely help us in terms of getting our game out there. Yeah.
We also asked what is being done by MDEC to ensure a steady flow of studios and gaming hits? How far are we to seeing a AAA game being developed by a studio in Malaysia?
On top of the 4 things that I mentioned, basically on talent development, funding, market access, and also policy, we also look at bringing in investments into the country. So these investments can come in many forms. You can bring in the big studios, where the activities of offshoring or outsourcing to local studios in Malaysia have happened before this, but we need to bring them closer to where the talents are, to where the studios are. That's why I think companies, previously we had Bandai Namco, for example, we had Sony PlayStation, we have Virtuos and Xsola, who has been within the Malaysian ecosystem, has expanded into the establishment of a proper academy to look at games development and a steady supply of games for us to do this. When there are jobs, when there are projects, there are jobs for our people to go into and to get into and to be employed. So we see that the transfer of technology and the upskilling of our resources here will happen faster if we bring in more studios and more investments into Malaysia, so that we can be that ecosystem that creates rather than just work with or even consume particular technology. So this is a set of things that we have done so far. Again, going back to the policy, we did come up with a framework called DICE, which is very much to look at the creative content ecosystem, of which within that there's games development, where we believe that with the execution of a certain framework would allow us to have a bit more realistic horizon of between 5 to 7 years, where we can see AAA games coming out from the local studios. When we say local studios, I think the age of today is slightly different than I think previously. It's not necessarily be Malaysian-owned studios, but rather Malaysia-based studios. So there's a difference between that, where we can have some of the companies who have a local presence co-creating games or AAA games in this manner together with or depending rather on our local resources. So they may come with a global brand, but basically more and more participation from our local players and talents. The activity of promotions, the activity and the programs that we do in terms of trying to get more jobs for them, more projects for them, it continues until today. So that comes in the form of projects with a specific focus. For example, we have the economy Madani with its values within that we would like to see that being manifested in the games that we do. So incorporation of certain Madani values or even the Malaysian values so to speak, that we want to be able to be seen in those games, whether you create a stage, whether you create some reference to our local cultures and values, and that would be something that we like to see. And translation of that is like we like to fund as well. So those would be the kind of things that we hope to be able to see. New ideas that is less westernized but more localized. I'm a big fan of the Korean export mechanism, if you may. Yeah, whether it's the that culture or whatever it is. If you watch K-drama or whatever it is, there's always, an aspect of certain values or cultures, whether it's the food, the cars, the electronics and things like that. And that's where they show all these things. If Malaysia would like to get to that through an animation, through movies, for example, that might take some time as well. But we see, because of games, animation are the platform where Malaysia are already exporting in a big way. Let's see if we can incorporate some of that into this. So if there's any message that I would like to give to the local and startups or people who are about to go into this, we would like to see how we can capitalize technologies in the form of games that we develop, where Malaysian values are being shown out there, even Madani values as well. There are ways to be able to export that. If we look at this, I think if I can just elaborate on that, MDEC as an agency, we look at the mandate is always facilitating a healthy growth of an industry or an ecosystem. We look at this as that by creating some of these projects where there's a win-win situation for the business, where they can have traction, they can have the track record, and at the same time promoting the country of which they are based in. That's why I said it can be a Malaysia-based company. So I can have a foreign game studio that comes to Malaysia, develop something in Malaysia, and promotes Malaysia at the same time. We like that. So that's the whole concept.
In the past, I think, there are lots of games that were produced with the grant. We've seen Company Man was one of them as well. So we're just lucky to have been a part of it as well, because they really helped us a lot, especially on our games like Super Steam Puff and Unicorns and Unicycles as well. I think, of course, there's always room for improvement, but I think they also helped a lot. Sometimes if there are road shows as well, even overseas, they would try to reach out to everyone. So we'll go under their umbrella, under Malaysian Pavilion, and then spend time together on the events to showcase our games as well. Meet in Malaysia games. Yeah.
There are a lot of game studios popping up in Malaysia. How does MDEC balance the financial returns and social impact of projects they support? What is MDEC's reassurance to these studios in terms of support?
For one, we are not a funding agency. So again, unlike, say, for example, Cradle or the MAFCAPs or the Penjana Capital and things like that, there's always that medium-term view of when can I get my returns, what can I grow from that. Unlike them, MDEC is more of an industry development agency. So whether we're looking from the companies, whether we're looking at talents, whether we're looking at investments, those would be growing the pie. And how we are being tracked, I think at the larger scale, is always about contribution of digital economy into as a size of Malaysian GDP. So it is about the economies of scale, it is about the size of the industry itself and how we do want to be able to grow that. So the motivation that we have is that the more companies who are partaking in this, the more talents that we have, means that by automatically we would have a healthy supply of talents for any company, studios, or even metaverse, for example, as we go towards that, would be looking at Malaysia because talents would be it. The games of providing cheap labor or incentives is not the only game that we should be focusing on. Talents would be the new, I think, currency, if you may. When you have that, and there's always room for you to be able to attract people to come to your country and set up business. So the more companies who are setting up the business here or who have businesses here, the more opportunities there is for our talents to be working, to be staying in Malaysia, and again, generating the economic activities that we have contributing towards the GDP, ultimately.
MDEC did notice us and they did help us in other ways. For example, they have programs where they kind of match us up with potential publishers, and they did introduce us to Nintendo. So we kind of have a meetup with some Nintendo representative, and because of that, we have ourselves Nintendo developers kit that we can port our games to Nintendo system, especially Nintendo Switch. So far, MDEC has done a pretty good job at bringing outside investors and publishers to Malaysia and have a look at Malaysia's game development scene. What I wish MDEC could do more in the future is to bring the teams in Malaysia outwards towards other countries, like let's say having Malaysia teams in showcasing their games in places like Tokyo Game Show or GDC. That way the exposure would be more efficient, more foreign publishers and investors would take notice of Malaysia's gaming scene, because if they decide not to come to Malaysia, they will never know how we're doing. I hope that in the future there's more outward exposure rather than bringing in more publishers from outside to Malaysia.
MDEC as a government agency has arguably better local support compared to its neighbours with similar government bodies in Southeast Asia. So we inquired, is there something being done by MDEC to help its neighbours of Southeast Asia, like cross-talent works and info sharing?
I think at ASEAN level, we do have collaboration, whether it's in the form of investment promotion, while each country would have its strengths and weaknesses, and we see and recognize the fact that Malaysia, while it remains as an alternative or an investment destination, fundraising normally would happen in Singapore. That's where all the monies, the VCs and all these things are there. Let's recognize that, but work within that. Similarly, we look at the Thailand and Indonesia with countries with huge markets, untapped, where we can sell. And Malaysia is just minute compared to that. So again, we work within those systems. So there is an ASEAN level informal collaboration within, with respect to the digital economy ecosystem, where we are working together with those countries. So definitely, as far as promoting the region, ASEAN region as an economic region, investment destination, and also particularly on the topic of games development and creative content, definitely something that we are working together. We compare notes. We are cross-pollinating, if you may, companies, and also sharing some of those resources. So, for example, if we have possibly a game studio that has an HQ in, say, Singapore, but a lot of the technical resources are being done in Malaysia, which then brings at least a bit of tax money and all that into and within the Malaysian, keeping that within the Malaysian system. So we do get a win-win situation, particularly on this. It's not perfect, I have to admit, but definitely I think ASEAN, and as we move towards the chairmanship of ASEAN next year, that remains one of the highest topics to be discussed with our neighbors and friends around the ASEAN region.
Going back to aspiring game developers and youngsters, what message does MDEC have for them and concerned parents when going into the games industry and games development?
From a country perspective, and then benchmarking ourselves against other countries within the games development perspective, I would say that we are maybe a high mid-tier up-and-coming country as far as games development is concerned, and also animation in general. So the future of career growth within the games development industry is there. Definitely big money is being thrown into more games development, although the technology has somewhat disrupted how we are developing games. It is expensive to actually enter a foray of games development. But one aspect to this is that the creation of intellectual properties. And this remains one of the KPIs of my team on digital creative content space, that we are looking at more intellectual properties to be created out of Malaysia, which means there are room for new ideas. There are room for smaller and up-and-coming studios to say that I think we have something unique that we want to be able to do that. Then there's that aspect of commercializing those IPs. So the upside as far as career and revenue aspect for companies or individuals going into this space is still healthy. Now coming back to the technology, the advent of technology, for example, the inclusion of AI in operations, I think the entire value chain or supply chain of games development has disrupted ways they are doing it. There's a lot more dependency on AI today, Whereas things that may take maybe 3 to 4 weeks to do, cleaning up certain pixels or whatever it is, suddenly with AI I can do it within a couple of hours. So I don't need this kind of resources, but I need the same resources to apply that knowledge into other parts of this. So at MDEC, we see the trend coming. We are talking to the companies and we are finding out what would be the next type of jobs or functions for up and coming and new developers or people going into this. And we start to work with the institutes, not so much higher learning, but more of the academy-like institutes, where the kind of syllabus, the kind of things that we teach now has to adapt to the use of technologies. So for example, we're going into big, as far as game is concerned, when they converge into metaverse, suddenly the use of blockchain is there for monetization and things like this. So we need to be able to see how can we also look at that. So which is why it brings me back to the investment of Exola, and they are not just a game company, but they are very much providing all the tools and infrastructure ready for any aspiring, whether game developers or game development companies, to get onto the system, whether from payment point of view, from the actual toolkit, technical toolkit, and so on and so forth. So we look forward at MDEC to help the ecosystem, whether you're starting out or you're established, to see how we can add value to all these things.
Creating the perfect scene for just get the creative minds out.
It's always about ecosystem, a healthy environment where people, business, and economy can thrive.
Something I learned about MDEC after going overseas and talking to people from other countries is that MDEC is very unique. People from other countries don't really have something like MDEC. So when I talk to people from the US, they don't have grants where they can just apply and get it and work on a game for a year. So I feel that MDEC is doing a really good job in terms of helping the video game industry grow in Malaysia. And myself, after receiving the grants from MDEC, I'm now part of MDEC, helping them judge the next applicants for the grants.
And there you have it, straight from the Vox Populi that MDEC is nurturing and fostering, as well as promoting Malaysian culture and talents for its game industry, spurring Malaysia's digital economy towards the digital hub of ASEAN.